The sirens are wailing through the dusty streets of Ouagadougou tonight, and the air is thick with a silence that feels heavier than any storm I have ever witnessed as a son of this beautiful but wounded continent. Ibrahim Traoré has just stepped onto the world stage and delivered a message that has sent shockwaves from the halls of Washington to the cafes of Paris. But more importantly, it has reached the hearts of every African father who simply wants to know his children will be safe when the sun goes down. Before we go any further, I want to welcome you back to our family here at Africa News Authority, and I send my deepest prayers for health and unity to all of you across the globe, because in times of great change, our only strength is the bond we share as people who value justice and truth. My friends in America, especially those of you who have worked hard your whole lives to build a legacy for your families, you understand that a house cannot stand if the foundation is crumbling. And right now, the foundation of the Sahel is under attack by forces that do not care about ballots or speeches. This is a man who is choosing the safety of his people over the approval of foreign powers. And it raises a question that we can no longer ignore. The journey is long, but we walk it together. Is Traoré saving his nation, or is he leading it into a deeper darkness? Let us look at the truth that the world is trying to hide. Let us look at the cold, hard facts. Because as men who have lived long enough to see through the smoke and mirrors of political theater, we know that the truth is often found in the names that the evening news conveniently forgets to mention. When Ibrahim Traoré says that elections in Africa are nothing more than a performance that costs lives, he is not speaking from a place of theory, but from the blood-soaked reality of our recent history. Just look at what happened in 2025 and early 2026 across this continent. In Cameroon, we saw Paul Biya, a man who is 92 years old and has held on to power for 43 years, win yet another term, while his main opponent was forced to flee the country for his own safety. In the Ivory Coast, Alassane Ouattara deployed 40,000 security personnel and banned all street demonstrations before claiming nearly 90% of the vote. But the most heartbreaking evidence comes from Tanzania, where the incumbent won with 97% of the vote, and what followed was a nightmare that no father should ever have to witness. Diplomatic sources and opposition leaders reported that between 1,000 and 2,000 people were killed by security forces using live ammunition on unarmed protesters. There were reports of mass graves and bodies being transported to undisclosed locations in the middle of the night. An entire nation was traumatized, not by a foreign invader, but by the very system that was supposed to give them a voice. Think about a man named Amadou, a hard-working farmer I met near the border of Burkina Faso, who spent his life building a small legacy for his 3 sons, only to see his village caught in the crossfire of political militias during an election cycle. While the politicians in the capital were arguing over constitutional amendments, Amadou was burying his youngest son because a campaign rally turned into a battlefield. This is the democracy that has been imported to our soil. It is a system where every 4 or 5 years, the work of building a nation stops and the looting begins. Because winning the next election requires money and patronage. Development projects become bargaining chips, and the national budget becomes a campaign fund. This is why our roads are crumbling and our schools are empty, while our leaders fly to Europe for medical checkups. I want to pause here and ask you a very personal question, because I know many of you are listening from faraway lands. Where did your journey begin? What is the name of the town or the village that you still call home in your heart? Please drop the name of your hometown in the comments, because we need to remember the places we are fighting for. We have been told for decades that this Western style of governance is the only path to prosperity. But the evidence on the ground tells a story of corruption, instability, and a staggering loss of life. Ibrahim Traoré is looking at this cycle of failure and saying that enough is enough. He is choosing to prioritize the right to live over the right to vote in a rigged system. But what was the specific moment that caused this sudden and dramatic turning point in the Sahel? What was the final straw that broke the back of the old guard? Stay with me, because what I am about to show you next reveals the true face of the forces that have been pulling the strings from the shadows for far too long. The decision that finally broke the old world apart was not made in a quiet office in Brussels or a luxury hotel in Paris, but right in the heart of a nation that has seen far too much blood and far too many empty promises. Ibrahim Traoré stood before his people and did what the global elites called impossible. He stopped the clock on a broken system that was designed to fail us from the very beginning. When he announced the dissolution of the National Electoral Commission and the suspension of political parties, you could almost hear the collective gasp from the international community. But on the streets of Ouagadougou, the reaction was something entirely different. I want you to picture the scene for a moment, because this is the part the mainstream media refuses to show you. There were no riots of anger from the common man, but instead, there was a sense of profound relief that felt like the first breath of fresh air after a long and suffocating fever. Thousands of young men and elders alike gathered in the squares not because they were paid to be there, but because they finally felt like someone was speaking their language. They saw a leader who was willing to trade the approval of the West for the safety of his own mother and sisters. The Western press is calling this a dark day for freedom. But for the people who have to bury their children because of election violence, this was the first day of a new life. This is the climax of a struggle that has been building for 60 years. It is a popular revolution that is being built on the ruins of a failed experiment. But we must be honest with ourselves, because every great change comes with a heavy price. And the forces that have profited from our division for decades are not going to sit quietly while their influence slips away. They are already sharpening their knives and preparing their sanctions. I want to ask you something, because I know many of you have seen leaders come and go throughout your lives. Do you believe that Ibrahim Traoré has the strength to stand against the entire world? Or is he walking into a trap that has been set for him since the day he took power? Please share your thoughts with us, because your wisdom is what keeps this channel grounded in the values that matter. We are watching a high-stakes game of chess, where the lives of millions are the prize. The tension is rising, and the world is watching with bated breath. Will the international community act in time to understand the heart of this movement, or will they try to crush it before it can even begin to breathe? The answer to that question might change the face of Africa forever. But there is another layer to this story that is even more disturbing. What happens to the families who are caught in the middle of this political earthquake? And what are the real consequences for the stability of the entire region? Stay with me, because the next part of this journey takes us into the heart of the crisis, where the true cost of this revolution is being paid in ways that will haunt us for generations to come. This is not just about politics anymore. It is about the soul of a continent that is tired of being a playground for foreign interests. I remember talking to an elderly man in a small village who told me that he didn't care about the name of the system, as long as his grandchildren didn't have to go to bed hungry or afraid of the dark. That is the simple truth that the experts in Washington and London always seem to forget. They talk about institutions and procedures, while our people talk about bread and peace. Traoré has tapped into that primal need for security and dignity, and that is why the reaction on the ground is so powerful. It is a moment of raw emotion, where the past is being buried and the future is being born in the middle of a storm. But as the world prepares its response, we have to wonder if they are ready for an Africa that no longer asks for permission to be free. Will the world act in time to see the humanity behind these headlines? Or will they continue to judge us by standards that have never worked on our soil? The stakes have never been higher, and the clock is ticking for everyone involved. The consequences of this political earthquake are reaching far beyond the government buildings in the capital, and they are being felt in the very marrow of the bones of our people who have lived in the shadow of fear for far too long. When we talk about the impact of Ibrahim Traoré's decision, we have to talk about the 2 million human beings who have been displaced from their homes, and the fact that 1/4 of all terrorist attacks on this entire planet in 2024 occurred right here on our soil. For my friends in America, who have always valued the safety of their own borders and the peace of their own towns, I want you to imagine what it feels like to live in a place where the most fundamental human right, the right to simply stay alive, is under constant threat from armed groups linked to Al-Qaeda and the Islamic State. Traoré has looked at the Western critics who lecture him on press freedom, and he has given them a hard truth that they are not ready to hear. He said that the right to life is the most urgent priority there is, and everything else must wait until the wolves are driven from the door. This is not just a political shift. It is a total transformation of how we define success in Africa. While the old system was busy holding expensive elections that led to mass graves, Traoré is focusing on the reopening of schools and the securing of food and water for the millions who have been left behind. He is reminding the world that Africa does not need to be taught about human rights by the very countries that once shackled us, because we had our own Charter of Rights, the Kurukan Fuga Charter, back in the 13th century, long before any European declaration ever existed. This is about reclaiming our dignity and our history. The Alliance of Sahel states, which includes Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger, is now an experiment in alternative governance that the rest of the continent is watching with bated breath. They are trying to build a system where a leader answers to his own people before he answers to a foreign capital. And the results are starting to show in the faces of the children who are finally returning to their classrooms. But as these nations pull together to build a new future, the pressure from the outside is reaching a boiling point. We are seeing a massive escalation in tensions as the old powers realize that their influence is being systematically dismantled. The question we have to ask ourselves as men who value the stability of our families is whether this movement will lead to a new era of African prosperity or if it will trigger a regional conflict that could draw in the entire world. I want to ask you something very important, because I know many of you have seen how quickly a region can descend into chaos when the old order is challenged. Do you believe that the right to life should always come before the right to vote in a time of war? Or is the ballot box the only way to ensure a peaceful future? Please let me know your honest take in the comments, because we are building a space where the truth is told by those who have to live with the consequences. We are seeing a new map of Africa being drawn in real time, and the stakes for global security have never been higher. The Sahel is the front line of a battle for the soul of the global South, and the outcome of this experiment will define the lives of our grandchildren. But as Traoré builds his defense, there is a specific reaction from the West that reveals exactly why this struggle is so personal for every African. What did the European Parliament do just last month that proved Traoré's point more than any speech ever could? Stay with me, because the next part of this story reveals the shocking truth about who the West really considers their partners in Africa. And it is a revelation that will change the way you see international relations forever. Is this the beginning of a larger crisis that will engulf the continent? Or is it the first light of a new African dawn that the world is trying to extinguish? The clock is ticking, and the answer is closer than you think. The international response to this movement has been exactly what we expected from the old guard in Brussels and Paris. But there is one specific event from just last month that I need you to hear, because it reveals the true heart of the struggle we are facing. On March 12, 2026, the European Parliament passed a resolution with over 500 votes demanding the immediate release of Mohamed Bazoum, the former president of Niger, who has been detained since the revolution in 2023. Now, listen closely to how they described him, because a retired French general named Christophe Gomard, who introduced the resolution, called Bazoum the main partner of the European forces in the Sahel. Did you catch that? They did not call him a representative of the African people or a leader chosen by his own citizens. They called him their partner, their man on the inside. For my friends in America who value the sovereignty of your own nation and the independence of your own leaders, I want you to ask yourself how you would feel if a foreign power described your president as their main partner instead of your representative. This is the very system that Ibrahim Traoré is rejecting with every fiber of his being. He is refusing to lead a country where the politicians answer to a foreign capital before they answer to the mothers and fathers who are struggling to put food on the table. Even the United States government felt the weight of this condescension, and they handed over a formal protest letter to the EU representative condemning what they called a paternalistic and arrogant attitude towards sovereign African nations. This is not just a local dispute. It is a global shift in power that directly impacts the security of the entire world. Because if the Sahel falls into total chaos, it will create a vacuum that will be felt on every shore. We are seeing a pattern where the West uses the word democracy as a shield to protect their own interests, while our people pay the price in poverty and blood. Traoré is asking us to look at the evidence and decide for ourselves if we want a system that works for us or a system that works for them. But as we stand at this crossroads, we have to ask if this is the beginning of a much larger crisis that will engulf the entire continent, or if it is the birth of a new era of true independence. The pressure is mounting, and the world is watching to see if this experiment in the Sahel can survive the storm that is gathering on the horizon. Is this the spark that will set the continent on a new path? Or is it a fire that will consume everything we have built? The answer to that question will define the next century for Africa and for the world. This brings us to the final moment of truth, because as we look at the face of Ibrahim Traoré, we are looking at the face of an Africa that is tired of waiting for permission to be free. Is he a hero who is building a new foundation for his people? Or is he a man who will be consumed by the very power he is trying to wield? These are the serious questions that deserve serious answers, and I want to turn it over to you, because your voice is the most important part of this conversation. For those of you who believe that Western-style democracy is the only path, I am asking you to show me the evidence of where it has delivered the kind of life-changing development that we see in places like Singapore or China. And for those of you who see what is happening in the Sahel as a necessary and brave experiment, tell me what gives you hope when you see the schools reopening and the people reclaiming their land. We are building a space here at Frontline Africa where our story is told by us and for us. And I want you to share this video with one person who cares about the future of our continent and the security of our world. Please subscribe and hit that notification bell, because we are just getting started, and your support is the only thing that keeps us going in this fight for the truth. We must remember that the most fundamental human right is the right to life. And until every African child can sleep without fear, our work is not done. I want to thank you for your time, your spirit, and your commitment to justice. Because, as we always say, the sky is not the limit. It is only the beginning for Africa. My name is Amadou, and I want you to take care of yourselves and each other until we meet again in the next episode. Ibrahim Traoré and the people of Burkina Faso are writing a new chapter in the history of Africa news, and we will be here to witness every step of the journey. God bless you all, and God bless Africa.